Oh my God, I'm live.
You're live.
So it's
All
all
right.
good, all good.
Hello and welcome to yet another Human Synergistics webinar. My name is John Van Etten, and I am joined today by Guy Kempfert of CultureWorks. I've been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. Guy and I have been working together. Guy, I was thinking about it before this call. It's been well over, I guess, 10 years
Hmm.
that we've collaborated on projects of culture and leadership diagnosis and development. So very happy to have the time with you today. I think this is the first webinar we've done, so thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining and contributing. And on a very exciting topic, and a topic we haven't talked about before, but I think one that's relevant, which is toxic leadership. So
Hmm.
important topic, something that I think a lot of organizations maybe don't address sort of head on. So today we have
Hmm.
that as our topic and some questions we've put together to try to cover the bases in terms of what is toxic leadership, how might we recognize that, what can be done about it,
Hmm.
and cover that topic. So, excuse me, thank you. Please, Guy, introduce yourself and welcome on the session.
Well, you've introduced myself already. So I'm Guy. I'm a consultant. So I've worked in a lot of companies as a permanently uh, as an employee, and I've consulted with numerous companies all over the world. And my interest in tox, I mean, it's a very strange interest. Um, but I have worked in so many organizations uh, where I came across toxic leaders, and that has always been. I mean, I worked as a consultant and I worked as an employee with toxic leaders, and it has always. I mean, I have sometimes even become desperate because it's been so hard for me to understand why on earth do people behave in such a toxic way? Why do they abuse other human beings? What's the point? Why not just be a good, constructive, nice leader? Because in my view, you get much better results. But then there are. So why do they do it? And then also more important, why do everybody just turns a blind eye? Why can they behave that way in organizations with impunity? Why is it accepted?
Yes.
Um, that has been on my mind very, very often. And I've done some research. I've come up with, my own uh, insights. And there's something that I would like to share. So I'd like to share insights around this topic. And I think this is something that all of us consultants encounter when we work in organizations, when we do transformation work, or when we engage in coaching or do some leadership development projects or organizational culture work or whatever. I mean, it's always there very often. And so I'd like to share this. And I'd also like to get inputs from whoever is joining us, and of course from you, John, as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we might not have all the answers to these questions, but I think it'll be a good discussion. So anyone who's joining us and following along, please feel free to add any questions you may have or other comments into the comment section. We'd be happy to read those as we go along and try to make sure we answer your questions around the topic of toxic leadership. So, well, then let's try to take the questions one at a time. I guess the first is around your interests, which you've already pointed out. I think probably anyone who's a consultant in coaching role, leadership and culture development has come across toxic leadership before. I'm always sort of heartened by the fact that it's not particularly common, right? But it is something that we definitely do run into, and it can be a challenge. So I think it's a good thing
Mm.
that we take the time to discuss toxic leadership and our interests in it. Um, I'm interested in the topic of toxic leadership. Sort of, I mean, it's really the reverse of looking at excellence in high performing leadership.
Hmm.
Leadership's an interesting thing to study and look at because it's not only the individual attempting to perform essentially in the organization, but it's the individual as a leader encouraging and enabling others to perform. So, leaders are those multipliers within organizations. A great book on that topic, by the way, multipliers. But it also works on the flip side. When I think about what is toxic leadership, and I think we'll get there in a moment, it really is when leaders, rather than enabling their people and having a positive effect on their people's ability to perform, we really are seeing actually a negative consequence by function of this leader leading. We're seeing our people actually ultimately able to essentially do less good work.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that fascinating in terms of the influence that leaders have on people and organizations, and not
Mm-hmm.
only, of course, the wonderful extent that can be positive, but it's also important to recognize, when it goes in the wrong direction, the real cost that can have. And again, it is broader than the individual leader because of that multiplying effect that leaders have in organizations. So, if you think of it from a systemic perspective,
Mm-hmm.
good leadership is key. Not only does that drive, 10 or 20 other people to do great work, but on the flip side, again, then what we're talking about, toxic leadership, really has a tremendous cost, right?
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and research shows us and corroborates what we've just said. But still, it's there, and it's
Right.
not just. I mean, it's not just once or twice, and it doesn't. It occurs in every organization that I have come across. There's always somebody who's toxic, and the question, of course, is what is it? I mean, when would we characterize somebody as toxic? Uh, and there's no simple answer. I mean, the toxic leadership,
Mm.
toxicity comes in so many shapes and forms. So my definition would be, so if there is a leader who shows a consistent pattern of destructive behavior, a leader
Yeah.
who has a negative impact, who causes lasting harm to people, to teams, to organizations, that is toxic. I mean, if it's just a one-off, it's not okay, but it's not toxic. But if this is a consistent pattern of destructive behavior, then I would call these people toxic. And again, there are so many different traits, and some come, in isolation. Some are traits that are combined. So I start with something very small but very common. You might have
Mm.
micromanaging people who just don't trust others, who need to control everything, who need to make sure that everything goes through, through their desks. Nothing leaves the office without their say so. This has a tremendous impact, and also a destructive impact, because everybody knows that I can't do anything, and I'm afraid because I don't want to make any mistake. But if there are mistakes, toxic leaders might go even further. They might start humiliating people, blaming people, even in public. I mean, I've seen that. When you stand out and you are blamed, you are humiliated because you apparently made a mistake. Uh, and the sad thing is, everybody sees this, everybody stands, and nobody helps you. And that is, I mean, if you think you're a grown-up person and you are humiliated by your leader in public, I mean, that is really, really terrible and creates fear. Um,
Yes.
and these people might also be very abrasive, might be openly aggressive. I mean, I have worked with CEOs who yelled at people. I mean, who made them stand there while they were sitting behind their desk, and who yelled at them and told them what idiots they were. I mean, can you imagine? So there's no empathy, there's no psychological safety, uh, and if this is accepted by the organization, then there's hardly anything you can do. But this is something we can come to later. But these are
Yes.
traits that I have come across.
I like it.
from micromanaging to being really abrasive and
Yeah.
yelling, not beating. I haven't I haven't come across anybody who actually uses
Thank
physical
goodness.
violence. uh, Maybe 100 years ago that would have been the case too. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah,
what your
well,
experience is.
we've evolved. We've evolved a bit past that. No, well, I was thinking about this question in advance of the call, and it was one that I took some time to think about because, toxic is a pretty powerful term.
Hmm.
And, how do we assign what is toxic and what is
Hmm.
not? And as I was thinking about it, I came up with a few sort of simple guidelines that as I look at, given what we do in terms of um, understanding what would be toxic. And by the way, I really liked what you said about a pattern of counter. What was it? Pattern of destructive behavior.
Hmm.
That is very much the point. So, what we're doing in human synergistics across many of our tools are measuring essentially behavioral patterns, and it's very
Hmm.
much what you said. Single actions are far less consequential than our patterns of
Hmm.
behavior.
Hmm.
And understanding and being able to measure that is huge. So what is toxic leadership? I would define it firstly based on the effect that it has. So
Hmm.
we know, and this isn't a big secret, that leaders influence primarily the ability of their people to do good work, their ability of their people to get tasks, get
Hmm.
their work done, and also leaders influence the well-being of the people that they lead, their level of
Hmm.
stress, their level of engagement, motivation, and so on. If you can demonstrate and measure that a leader has a negative influence on the performance and well-being of their people, right, which is absolutely something that we can and can be easily measured, um, that I think that fits the definition of toxic
Yeah,
leadership,
I
right? The
mean,
purpose of it's counter to sort of the purpose and
yeah,
function of a leadership role.
I mean, take a look at the circumplex that is just behind you. You have the
Right. Right.
you have the
Yeah.
aggressive red leaders on the one side who
Sure.
cause
Sure.
green behavior on the other side, very defensive
Right.
behavior. You know,
Right.
you play safe.
Right. Right. But that's an interesting when we think about toxic. It really, if we're looking at it through that counterproductive lens, then really in this kind of model, defensive behavior would all fall within that. So yes, we're of course all probably much more familiar with the leader who is, dominating and controlling and micromanaging and what would be described as aggressive defensive
Hmm.
behavior. But it's also true that you see toxic leadership playing out in other forms as well. Leaders who
Hmm.
aren't able to stand up and make a decision, who
Hmm.
can't break the status quo of the way we've always been doing things.
Hmm.
There are all sorts of ways in which toxic leadership, I think, can play out in terms of the behaviors. Also, I would argue, and getting a little off track, but a lack of constructive behavior is
Hmm.
also toxic, right?
Hmm.
Not being able to try new things, not being able to share information with other people, not being able to work towards
Hmm.
goals
Hmm.
is going to have that kind of consequence as well. So, how it plays out is unique to every leader, but I guess one of the ways I would define a toxic leader is if it basically their contribution is at a cost to
Hmm.
those people whom they lead.
And to the
Um,
organization.
Correct, exactly, and
Hmm.
thereby to the
Hmm.
organization. And that's really my second answer to what is toxic leadership, and that would be leaders who are role modeling behaviors that are inconsistent with your values. We're all about excellence and taking care of customers and supporting, but we have leaders who are doing very much the opposite, if you will,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That I think is toxic leadership as well, because we know that leaders not only influence directly the people whom they immediately lead, but they serve as a role model for what kind of behavior is accepted, tolerated, and appropriate here. And if we have leaders who are role modeling things very different than our values, um, that's going to have a consequence for your business. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. And then the question is, why do they do it?
Oh, hold on. Let me find that question. There we
Hmm.
go. Yes, indeed. Why? Well, let
Because
me start with, please. Yes.
it's obvious. I mean, everybody knows what toxic leadership looks like, and everybody knows that you shouldn't do it. And everybody knows that if you consistently behave in a disruptive way and are abrasive to others, then, I mean, it's common sense that then people don't perform at their best,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
But still, they do it.
But still.
And still, it's accepted. And the question is, for me, it's why. I mean,
Yeah.
and there are so many explanations and so many different types of these people. And I mean, I work with a CEO that you also know very well, in a company who took over the company when it was almost bankrupt, and who was mainly responsible for the turnaround, and the shares went through the roof. I mean, they went from, oh, well, I'm not saying anything because I don't want to pinpoint to who it was. But he was a very smart guy and could be very charming, but he was very toxic. I mean, he was choleric. He was a choleric narcissist. And so he had a personality disorder. And there are other people who have this disorder as well. I mean, they might be psychopaths. A lot of them are narcissists, and a lot of narcissists, more than the average, people. You find a lot of these guys in top positions in organizations, or they might just be very devious, people who follow Machiavelli orders and think that all means justify the ends. And maybe they are just insecure. But I think the main reason why we have this, or one of the main reasons, is that there's so much economic pressure. Since we have these quarterly results meetings, everybody has to meet the budgets. Everybody has to, or particular CEOs and the top management, they always have to come up with even better numbers and better results. So what they do, and this is what I have seen and and felt myself very often. So they put a lot of pressure on their direct reports, and this has a ripple effect. Everybody tries to get even better results, so they do whatever it costs, and they think that the only way to do it is to put a lot of pressure, which is toxic in a way, because people then do it, but they don't do it because they want to achieve something. They just do whatever it takes in order to get the results. And usually in these organizations, you also have this lack of psychological safety. And in my view, this is accepted because this can only be accepted if you have if you have people who do what you tell them, if you have people who follow you, if you have people who don't who dare not to speak up, or who dare not to contradict you, who just do what they are told. So there's a lot of fear in these organizations. There's fear of retaliation. And I think the most important thing is that there is a huge lack of psychological safety. If you have companies, organizations where you have a high degree of psychological safety, then people speak up, people give feedback, people dare to even criticize things. People are encouraged to go far and beyond and go the extra mile. People are encouraged to even take risks. But if there is no psychological safety, you don't even take risks, because why would you take a risk and run the risk of, coming up with and fail? Because exactly, if you fail, I mean, then you're done, and you might be humiliated. You might be blame, you might even lose your job. So who wants to lose his job? So I think there are lots of reasons why this is accepted, and I don't know if this
Mhm.
is research based, but I have very often come across this notion of that's how we get results. I mean,
Right.
even in
Yeah.
companies where you were working and
Mhm.
where we did cultural surveys, where we did LSIs, everything. I had top managers who said, well, but you need to be read in order to be successful. You need to be
Mhm.
success. Yeah, I mean, you need to be competitive.
Mhm.
If you're not competitive, you don't get results. And I think historically, um, we have this notion of this hero culture, as I would call
Mhm.
it. So we have had so many so-called great leaders who have a lot of blood on their hands. I mean, if you go through history, you have what comes to mind, Alexander the Great. I mean, he was great and he killed hundreds of thousands of people. Caesar, Napoleon, Steve Jobs. I mean, they were all so great and so successful, but
Yes.
they were all toxic. And it all came at a huge cost. What I mean to say is that there's this notion in a lot of people that, okay, it's not good, but this is how you get results. If you're not like this, you are this, airy fairy, hippie kind of nice, but not really successful leader. And this is not what we want. So I think if a lot of people, if they can decide whether they want a good, a nice, a constructive leader or a bad leader,
Good.
a lot of them would go for the bad leader because they think he's the one that gets results. It's my notion. I don't know what your experience is.
Oh goodness. There are several pieces of that, of what you're talking about. A important concept. So, one of this around the question of why do people behave in these, why is this happening and why is it accepted? Um, I think a lot of it comes back to, you made the statement before that there are certain personality types,
Hmm.
narcissists and so on, who maybe and while that's been researched and looked into, and I recognize that attracts a certain, leadership positions attract people who are looking for power and influence, right?
Hmm.
And so that is a factor, but in my experience looking at toxic leaders, it's being done because it's what works. It's
Yeah.
not that these people are born toxic. It's
No.
that the way in which the system is designed encourages that behavior within their context and situation.
Hmm.
Toxic behavior is actually logical. So,
Yeah.
and this is something you and I have run into when we talk with leaders, and
Hmm.
why are you doing these toxic behaviors? And they'll give you good and logical reasons why, in this situation, in this circumstance, that sort of thing is necessary. And that also
Hmm.
goes back to the point that, when you think about behavior, there's no really true good behavior, bad behavior. It's all in patterns. And to what extent do we do this? And yes,
Hmm.
I, as a leader, need to point out when something is wrong. All right. We
Hmm.
need to be aware of when we're making mistakes. But
Hmm.
how much of that, focusing on the negative, being critical, pointing out mistakes, at what point does that no longer contribute to the effectiveness of my team, but
Yeah.
begin to hinder it, right? And that's the threshold of functional, constructive behavior to becoming an extreme counterproductive. And that's something I think most leaders don't directly recognize. And this is coming
Yeah.
back to, why does this happen? Because they think it works. It seems to work.
And I
And
think
that's one
that,
of the
yeah, and I think
the
there's a misunderstanding of constructive leadership because the misunderstanding is that they don't really point out mistakes. They are airy fairy, nice,
yeah.
good, good people. Whereas you have to be strict and you have to point out mistakes and you have to be, there have to be consequences. And yes, constructive leadership doesn't mean you leave everything uh, undone and you don't address issues, but you address them in a constructive way, which is completely different.
Right.
But this is the
And
misunderstanding.
what you're describing is something I've run into in organizations, and it's an interesting factor of culture, honestly, that, you know, and what we're talking about right now is essentially what we would call aggressive behavior
Mm-hmm.
in culture. And in those kinds of environments, you know, it's really interesting. There's that wonderful comic about organizational culture, and it's a fish swimming in the ocean, and it comes up to another fish and asks, you know, how do you like the temperature of the water? And the other fish says, what water? Right. And that's sort of the the idea of culture sort of surrounds us in organizations. We don't really maybe recognize it. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the interesting things is, as organizations become increasingly aggressive, you know, the ability for them to recognize the importance of more interpersonal approaches um, begins to diminish. So I'm not sure if that's making
Mm-hmm.
sense, but when you look at functional individuals, teams, and organizations, you
Mm-hmm.
need a shared perspective. You need
Yeah.
an awareness of what the goal and task and purpose is, and you also need an awareness of how you contribute, how others fit into this, how we work together to achieve that goal. In
Mm-hmm.
a lot of organizations, for a variety of reasons, the focus becomes primarily task oriented. It's all about what we do and what we deliver, and less about how we do that, how we
Mm-hmm.
support one another, how we share information, how we coordinate. And you
Mm-hmm.
need both of those in balance. So, in any
Mm-hmm.
case, as organizations fall into those patterns, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to recognize that there are other functional ways of working.
Mm-hmm.
And this, honestly, I think goes back to misattribution of success errors, where, you know, we're doing this and it seems to work. We're getting
Mm-hmm.
results with it.
Yeah,
Therefore, that's the justification we need to continue. What you
that's
really
it.
find with those approaches is they are at a net negative. There is a loss. You are getting things done, but you're doing it in a way that costs your business and your people more than the productivity that you're getting
Yeah, but
out
the
of it.
trouble is,
And
it's a long
that's the
term.
illusion. Yeah.
The cost is usually long
Yeah.
term.
Yeah.
And
The short-term win for the long-term cost, yes.
politicians like your president
Oh,
and CEOs think short term. That's the
yes. Yes.
difficulty.
Well,
Quarterly
and here,
results are every three
right.
months.
Yeah, and let me get to the other, and you're hitting again the other point that I meant to get to, and that is that, look, these toxic behaviors happen because they're encouraged and facilitated by the
Yeah,
system. You
yeah.
know, the organization, the government, the system is
Mm-hmm.
designed in a way, it's not a perfect system. It's designed in a way that it can be taken advantage of, and
Mm-hmm.
it can encourage people to do things that actually aren't consistent with the goals and purpose
Mm-hmm.
of that organization.
That's it.
And people are clever, and they'll find ways of taking those shortcuts
Mm-hmm.
and gaining attention and recognition and gaming the
Mm-hmm.
system, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And it's not that toxic leaders are, you know, evil people. It's that in their environment and situation, that is a logical way to respond. They can see that it has caused them, right, but it's designed in an imperfect system. IO psychology is
I don't quite agree, because as an intelligent person, you should be able to reflect on your behavior, and you should
sure,
encourage people to tell you and to give you feedback. So
sure,
I don't think
but
that these
if the
leaders
system
don't
doesn't vote, yeah,
recognize what you do. I think they are usually quite
well,
aware of what they do, but they don't care because the success,
it
you
benefits them
know,
personally, right? It enables
shows
them to
them that they are on
utilize the
the right
system.
path. And this
Yeah,
is what the CEO
exactly.
told me. He said,
Right,
"What is it that you want?
right.
I'm successful. Anything else?
Right.
Go
Well,
away."
and that's that's what you find in this sort of system is it benefits the individual but
Yeah.
costs the system.
Yeah.
So it's sort of I have that silly example. Sometimes I like to say, you go into an organization and go into a sales team, and
Mm-hmm.
you go to one of the people who's very good at selling, and you ask them, have you learned methods and techniques and maybe even tricks to help sell more? And let's say they say yes. The next question is, do you share that information proactively with your other sales members and sales team? Right?
Right.
That's the question that is asking about psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
If we're psychologically safe, then why wouldn't I share that information, best practices with
Mm-hmm.
others, so that we all can sell more and the system functions most effectively? That's the
Mm-hmm.
constructive response.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the defensive response is, no, I do not share those secrets and best practices with my peer. That's my advantage against them.
Yeah.
Right. And there you're hearing the psychological insecurity that I need to prove and demonstrate that I am better than my peers. And in that kind of insecure environment, then you'll have people exhibiting toxic behavior, like not sharing best
Mm-hmm.
practices and letting other people fail and make mistakes to the cost of the business and the greater system. Sure, but it benefits that individual personally. And that is a classic example of toxic behavior that's designed right into the system. You're
Mm-hmm.
encouraging it by designing,
Yeah.
sales feedback in that way. And that those
Mm-hmm.
things are well known, but I'm afraid it's far more widespread than people realize. I think if people really reflect on their jobs, they'll might start to recognize that there's all sorts of things that unintentionally I seem like a best practice, but unintentionally actually had the effect of encouraging us to do things that just get in
Mm-hmm.
the way and hold us back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's systemic.
Right. I
Uh,
would say it's a systemic issue more than an individual issue.
yeah.
But those
That's why.
individual toxic leaders are notable. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it takes somebody with the um, with that toxic attitude or behavior, because
Yeah.
there are other people who refuse to lead it in a toxic way in
That's
the
true.
same
That's
system.
true.
So the
Thank goodness.
system
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily
Right.
force you to
Correct.
behave in a toxic way, because there
Correct.
are other
and
good
that's
examples.
and that's the difference between culture and individual behavior. We had that question
Hmm.
a lot. With
Hmm.
OCI we measure culture, with LSI we measure individual behavior. And
Hmm.
why are those two different things? They absolutely are. What's
Hmm.
being encouraged of you in the organization and expected systemically is culture, but how you actually choose to use your
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
exercise your that's your own individual behavior. And there's a fascinating gap, of course, between those two things. And as you said, thankfully, just because toxicity may be encouraged in the system doesn't mean every leader is going to engage in
No,
that.
no, no. But still, I mean, if you really want to put an end to toxic behavior, you have to work on the and the culture level.
Correct. Right.
Um,
Make sure we're not
yeah,
encouraging it, right? Or else
no,
it's not sustainable.
yeah, but I think you can only do something if you start at the very top. So if the top management is aware of the negative impact of toxic behavior, and if they are convinced that constructive behavior long term, or sometimes even short term, leads to much better results, only then do I see
Right.
the chance of a remedy of the fact that
Yeah.
culture initiatives might permeate the whole system. But if you see toxic behavior, if you see people at the very top turn a blind eye to this
Right.
behavior,
Yes.
although they might, voice their encouragement for
Yes.
positive and good leadership or constructive
Yes.
leadership, then you're lost. Um,
Exactly. And there's your role
because,
modeling.
yeah, you have to role model it, and
Yeah.
you have to implement it very rigorously at the top. And then you
Yeah.
can come up with systemic interventions. I mean, you can take a look at your values. You can, look at your performance management. So you can, I mean, you can
Yep.
introduce performance managements where you reward behavior as well as outcomes, as well as
Imagine that.
performance.
Not
Um,
just what we deliver, but how we deliver
yes,
it, right?
yes,
Yeah.
you can do that. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then, if you have to decide, you can even say behavior is much more important than the outcome,
It is.
because of the devastating impact that it has. Or you look at recruiting processes. Who do we want to hire? What kind of competencies are we looking for? What should Who should we promote? What should the talent management
Right.
process look like? Um, who do we Why do we
Exactly.
promote these people? What does the learning development portfolio look like? Do we have employee surveys? Blah blah blah. I mean, it
Right.
starts with the awareness of people saying, "This is what we want. We
Right.
want psychological safety. We want constructive leadership." And in order to do that, we don't encourage toxic or bad leadership. That's
Right.
it. And we do it
Right.
at all levels. And
Yeah.
we role model this. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to do anything about that. Because I
Yeah.
don't think individuals have much impact. I mean, if you are an employee,
Right.
I mean, of course you can speak up and you can tell your
Yes.
toxic boss, this is toxic, I don't like it.
Right.
Well, I'm not sure how long you last.
It doesn't
And
necessarily change the system. Yeah,
and
that's right.
and probably all your colleagues just stand by and look at you,
Right.
but they don't help you.
Well, and there's the system and what
Yeah,
it's encouraging, right? No,
yeah,
yeah, and I really like what you say. So I also think this is where values are very helpful. So when we think
yeah.
about what is good leadership, I think
Mm,
organizations need to go back and look at their values and purpose and mission statements, and that I think will serve them well to think about,
but
what
look,
that is.
let me interrupt you here, John. uh,
Please.
have you come across any values in any organization which doesn't say uh, we
Right,
value
right.
integrity, high performance,
I know they're all the
honesty,
same.
kindness, blah blah
Yes,
blah?
yes, I know.
Nobody says
Indeed.
we honor toxic leadership.
Good. See, they're off
Yeah,
to the right start. They've got the right
yeah.
idea. Good. It's the
But you
knowing
have to
doing gap is tough.
you
But
have to
here's the
actually
thing,
do it.
right. So start with those values that we are very clear, we are very,
Yeah.
have, and then again, if leaders aren't behaving in ways that are consistent with those values, that's an issue.
Hmm.
And one of my favorite quotes from another client that I think we collaborated on was that your culture is not only the behavior that you encourage, it's the behavior that you tolerate. And that
Yeah.
is true, right?
Hmm.
So even if we say we're all about inclusion and all good things, but we
Hmm.
have a leader or two who are actively, right, role modeling something else, that is completely undermining to the business. So
Yeah.
being
Hmm.
able to get clear on what those values are, or what good leadership is, and to measure against that, how
Hmm.
am I interacting with my people, what is the current
Hmm.
behavior that I exhibit, and how consistent is that with our values directly.
Hmm.
That's, I think, a great way to address toxic leadership and create the awareness. The other thing I wanted to say is, again, not only do I think this is less of an individual issue, I don't think it's that there are really individual toxic leaders taking over businesses. It's more frequent that businesses unintentionally are designed in ways that encourage that kind of behavior.
Hmm.
Um, but the other thing I will say is that I've never run into a leader who says they want to be described as a toxic leader, right? They're not. That's not the goal here,
Not
right?
true.
And if they,
Not true.
okay, you
In
found one.
my
All right, good, good.
one of
Well,
my last companies, I had a COO who said, "I went through the school of hard knocks," and he
yeah,
told me about his childhood, and he said, "And this is why I behave in that way, because
this is payback.
everybody has to go through this, and that's how they learn
Oh,
it." I'm serious.
well,
That's what he
yeah,
said. That
okay,
was his philosophy of life, because he
yeah,
had a very, very tough childhood, and he made it to the top because he beat up everybody else, and he said that's how
right,
you do it, and that's why I'm so successful. I mean, there are these people,
right,
and
right,
I
right.
don't think people just become toxic because the system allows them to become toxic.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
got to be
there's
some
an inclination to
predetermination for that. take
there's an
advantage of that
inclination
system.
already to
Yeah.
do it, because otherwise, I mean, would you become toxic just because the system allows you to become toxic?
No, sure, that's correct.
I don't
You're
think you
right.
would do that.
No, no. Well,
You
you
might
choose
be,
to contribute somewhere where you can. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. That's right. And you're right. There is a self-selection aspect to
Hmm.
this as well.
Yeah.
In
You
terms of,
always have a choice.
yeah, yeah, indeed,
Some
indeed.
people are not aware of the fact that they have a choice, because they think, I don't have a choice. I have to do that because,
And then that's
my mortgage and my family and blah, blah,
yeah,
blah.
yeah. One of the most important coaching lessons in the beginning is that you really do have a choice. And that's particularly true of people in leadership and management
Yeah.
positions, right? With that
Hmm.
authority in the business,
Hmm.
you need to be able to exercise a choice and
Yeah.
get clear on, look, what's going to help our people do better work, and what's getting in the way and holding us back, and have that inherent obligation and responsibility
Hmm.
to be a leader that leads. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how else to describe it, right? But once we become toxic in our leadership, we're actually not by function leading people anymore. We're
No.
constraining and holding back, and
Yeah.
um, that's not the role.
Yeah. And I think you have to
Yeah.
like people. If you're a leader of people, you
I
have to like
think it
people.
certainly does help. Yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
it does.
You would think, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
good.
Good. Um, Very good. I think we have maybe one more. Well, let's move to this question around what can be done as we're closing in on our time, sir.
Well, as
So,
I said,
I'll
you
start
have
with
to
you.
work.
Yeah, what
I
can be
think you
done?
have to start on. I mean, it can only this. It has to be. There has to be an awareness at the top. It has to start at the top. Just like culture initiatives, if you can't start at grassroots, you can't start at the bottom. Uh, I mean, you can try, but you will probably always fail. It has to start. This awareness has to start at the very top. You can start with HR, and try to bring this to the attention of the top management if they don't know. But then they have to become the sponsor, and they have to work on a systemic level, but also on a personal level. Then they have to openly declare what good looks like in their company, what they tolerate and what they don't tolerate, and then they have to actually also do it and implement it rigorously. Uh, Otherwise, and also, I mean, I think the trickiest point is that when um, business isn't doing so well,
Mm.
and because that's the time when a lot of people resort to tough leadership. That's just like in soccer teams. They just fire the trainer uh, when it doesn't work the way it should. So that's usually the shortcut that a lot of people do. Now we need a tough leader again because business is not doing so well. So they have to resist this temptation and to stick to their values and to their uh, conviction in a way, and
Indeed.
to their belief. And I think I'm really convinced that good leadership, constructive leadership, can produce long-term economic success of a company.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
I mean, I might be naive, but what's the company that you would like to work for? What does the environment look like that you would like to work for? I would like to work in an environment um, where I can go for high achievement together with a team, where I can meet challenges, even at the risk of failing in between,
Yes.
um, where we get feedback, where we together as a team try to get the best out of the situation, and that means that we treat everybody in a constructive way. That doesn't mean that we shy away from conflicts. That doesn't mean that we don't address issues. We do that, but in a constructive way. That's what I would love to do, because then I go there and I'm, I don't get a burnout. I'm not stressed. I'm not afraid. I can be myself, and
Yes.
I can use all the energy that I have for the success of the company. But
Indeed.
if I work in a toxic environment, and there's a nice book about, I can't remember who that was, who said that if I work in a toxic environment, I spend a lot of energy saving my back, pretending,
Right.
to
Right.
becoming inconspicuous, trying not to be caught, trying not to make any mistake. A lot of energy is taken away from that. But if I work I mean, Google has shown that in their big research on psychological safety. If I work in that environment and that requires constructive leaders, then I can flourish. That
Right.
is my hopefully not naive assumption. And I think
No.
you have a lot of data to
Yes.
prove that. I mean, you
Yes.
have
No, what you're
done
saying is
cultural
correct.
assessments with companies who repeatedly have shown that their culture is very constructive, and they are
Right.
also economically very successful.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's sort of sad that it's not more clear to leaders and organizations. So, yes, constructive behavior contributes most positively and
Hmm.
most consistently to
Hmm.
profitability in organizations.
Hmm.
The defensive kind of toxic behavior we're talking about actually can be demonstrated to come at a cost.
Hmm.
Occasionally, those strategies seem to pay off, which is part of what creates
Hmm.
um, this misattribution of success is really what's playing out. You know,
Yeah.
when we use these short-term, hard, aggressive strategies in organizations,
Hmm.
occasionally it pays off.
Hmm.
Most of the time, it comes at a real cost to the
Yeah.
business. But when we're in that toxic mode, we're also motivated to bring attention to the one time that this paid off, draw
Hmm.
lots of attention to look at me, look how good I did, look at the, and to downplay or blame or cover up the
Hmm.
80% of the time that that strategy fails. And
Hmm.
so you get this skewed perception in organizations that, the hard aggressive strategy works
Hmm.
because we bring attention to it when it does work, and
Hmm.
we cover it up, don't talk about it, blame it on someone else when it
Hmm.
doesn't. And when you
Hmm.
actually look, more consistently at what's happening, you can see that those approaches are not the most effective way to lead a business forward, to drive
Hmm.
productivity, and to drive profitability.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so, yes, it is in fact in the constructive styles, but it takes some bravery, especially on the
Hmm.
part of leaders, to
Hmm.
trust their people,
Hmm.
role model those behaviors, let go of some of the control, and uh,
Hmm.
and take that
Hmm.
step to more constructive, positive leadership and away from, toxic patterns that might hold people back.
Hmm. And it takes some bravery, and because it's
Yes,
riskier, because everybody, you know, they are in the limelight. Everybody looks at them, and as
right,
soon
right,
as there's a dip in the numbers, then they are blamed for that. Whereas if you take a toxic
yes,
approach, you're not blamed because
right,
that's not your
right,
fault. I mean, that's somebody
right.
else's.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Okay.
you pointed out the system behind that, the
Hmm.
insecurity that that kind of system creates, and the defensive, toxic behavior that's motivated as a result. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fascinating how it works. It's
Hmm.
unfortunate that it's so common, but I
But
guess
there
to
are also
answer
good
our
examples. I mean,
yes,
I
yes,
mentioned Steve Jobs, who was
mm,
um, a terrible example of a toxic leader, but his successor is even more successful, and he's not toxic, apparently, from what I hear. So it is possible, even in
it
big,
is
big organizations. So let's end on a good and positive note.
it is more
Let's
than
not talk about
possible.
some
Yes.
politicians.
No, 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 that's not. No, it's more than possible, and in fact, it's what we do. That's what our business is all about, is
Yeah.
helping leaders, toxic or not. One thing I've learned is, it's not about really toxic and excellent leaders. What you really find is that every leader can benefit from learning.
Hmm.
Everyone has room to grow and improve. So
Hmm.
whether, whether you think you're in the toxic
That's our
zone or the
business.
excellent zone, there's always one more step to take. So
Yeah.
that growth and development is what we're about. Thank you, Guy, so much for your time today. I really enjoyed talking about this topic with you. I knew you'd have great insights, and
Okay.
I'm sure everyone
You're
enjoyed it.
welcome.
So thank you so much for
Good.
joining. Thank you, anyone who tuned in, and we'll
You're
record
welcome.
this and make it available.
Okay. Good.
All right, sir. Thank
See
you.
you.
Look forward to the next leadership and culture project, sir.
Okay. Bye.
All right. All the best. Bye bye.